Hello, and welcome to this week's Thinking Thursday. This is the first one that is live from Thinking Thursday's own page. Sort of exciting for me as I'm starting something new. And it's so new, I don't know if I've worked out all the bugs because I don't know what the bugs are, but we are here and excited. And as always, we're going to start with a little deep breathing. I need a little breathing myself today because, as I said, starting from my own page, trying to make it happen, not sure what I'm doing, but I think I've got it worked out and I'm excited. For those of you who are watching us for the first time or maybe listening later on, I will tell you we always begin with deep breathing. Why? Because as you breathe in and breathe out and learn to exercise those lungs and get everything working, you'll find you are allowed to, your body is allowed to relax so much more. When you inhale and exhale deeply, which we will practice in a moment, you're taking more oxygen into your body, more oxygen into your lungs and in your brain, and your body can relax. Many of you may have had a stressful day, and it's time to sort of get through the stress of the day. So let's practice by breathing in. I'm going to give you a count of four, and as I count to four, you breathe in, and I'll give you a count to four to breathe out. And we're going to take three good, deep, cleansing breaths. So let's breathe in, two, three, four, out, two, three, four. In, two, three, four, out, two, three, four. One more in, two, three, four, out, two, three, four. Hopefully, a moment of breathing has allowed you to calm down and slow down a little from today because that's something we all can do. That breathing that I just had you walk through is something you can do every day, and I recommend it doing it every day. If you're having a stressful day, just breathe. If you find yourself in a situation where you're upset, angry, just breathe. Breathing in and breathing out, taking in air, letting it out, cleansing breaths can make a major difference. So try it. Today, we are going to talk about Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. Now, a lot of you listening to me know it. Some of you lived through eras where it was part of your life. But I want to take time tonight to talk about it again and renew it. Renew it in your mind. I want to take a moment to look at Martin Luther King not just as the larger than life person that he was, but just as a person. So if you're here, just put a thumbs up in the box and let me know you're here. As I said, this is the first time I'm going live from this page. I want to know if anybody's here out there. Let me know. Um, Also, if you have any comments about MLK, let me know. I'll be happy to hear it. I'll be happy to share it. So, let me tell you a little about him as a child. You know, we know so much about Martin Luther King as the civil rights icon that he was. We sometimes forget he was just a man, like a human being, and he was a child, and he had a childhood. He grew up. He did things. He had even his rebellious, somewhat, attitude. So let me tell you about some of that. I thought it was interesting. Many of you know his name at birth was not Martin. It was Michael. And I found out in my research recently that it wasn't actually changed on his birth certificate officially until he was 28 years old. It had been, one source I read said it was crossed out and the name changed, but the official document didn't come until he was an adult. We know he was a pastor and we know his father was a pastor, but his maternal grandfather was also a pastor. So he had this long lineage of pastors in his family. And he not resented, but resisted rather, the idea of being a pastor. That was not going to be his thing. So when he was in college, it actually was the one of the deans that Benjamin Mays, whose influence on him to convince him otherwise, convinced him to study theology. And many of you may know that he went to Morehouse. He was a Morehouse man, but he went at age 15. There was a special program to increase college enrollment and to really focus on students that were exceptionally bright, and he fell into all these categories, and he skipped 2 grades, 10th and 12th, in his educational career, and he was able to start college at age 15. um, Something else about that, the summer before he went to Morehouse, he didn't just have a normal summer. He went to, I believe it was Connecticut. He was in a program in Connecticut. No, actually, he spent his summer on a tobacco farm in Connecticut. And it was his first time away from home. And he was amazed that Black people and white people were interacting. He was really amazed that they went to church together. This was unheard of where he was from. So he just couldn't believe that it would happen. He stated, "I never thought that a person of my own race could eat anywhere." That particular summer of his 15th year going into Morehouse changed his life. It deepened his growing hatred for segregation. Of course, no one Black in that point in time liked segregation. It wasn't something we wanted, it was something that we could adhere to take in and say, oh, it's okay. But there were so many incidents for people that just deepened their hatred for it. So he really fought the whole ministry, but that summer and going to Morehouse changed his life. Just a little about his education. As I said, he went to Morehouse at 15. He graduated in 1948 and went straight to Kosher Seminary, which is where he learned about the work of Mahatma Gandhi, and the what gave him the framework for his work in peace and nonviolence was studying Gandhi. He learned that in seminary, while he was in seminary. After he left Kosher Seminary, he attended Boston University, and that's where he got his doctorate. And he went back to back to back. He graduated with his BA in 1948, started seminary in 1948, graduated Kosher Seminary in 1951, started Boston University in 1951. He had his PhD by age 26. While he was in Boston is when he met his wife, Coretta. Looking and also just looking where he grew up pretty good neighborhood. He grew up in a part of Atlanta at the time was called Sweet Auburn, and it was the bustling Black Wall Street of Atlanta. So he grew up having his needs met. He was able to be afforded a very good education, and it obviously did well for him. We just don't think about him as a child, so I thought it was interesting to say a few things about that. Another thing, when he was 12 years old, his grandmother died. His grandmother was very special to him. When he got the news that his grandmother died, and it was his maternal grandmother, when he got the news of her death, he was really shaken and unstable and upset. She had a fatal heart attack, and he was at a parade without his parents' permission. He was 12. This led him, one account says, to attempt suicide by jumping from a second story window. I have read that in two accounts, but I found that interesting. but he was shaped by her death. And as a 12-year-old, there's the thought of just so much grief that you don't understand. And he really didn't like the idea that he wasn't where he was supposed to be. He was being disobedient. He was at a parade when he shouldn't have been because he didn't have his parents' permission. So, just a little about Martin Luther King as a child. And I thought that was interesting to look at for a moment because it kind of puts it into perspective that he is a person just like the rest of us. He was a child. He went through regular life as a child, doing regular childhood things. But his life was very different. It took a very powerful turn. He didn't plan for it to be that way. He didn't set out, as more read, to say, everyone might want to have their mark on society, but as a child, this is not the mark he thought he would have. When looking at Martin Luther King, we can't help but look at the civil rights movement. Now, why do I want to take time looking at Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement today? When you think of the recent action of the insurrectionists that stormed the Capitol, we see that racial injustice, racial hatred persist today just like it has in the past. It has not gotten any better. As a matter of fact, recently it's gotten worse. I want to infuse this with some quotes from Martin Luther King throughout this. One quote is: "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." And when we think about what's going on in our country right now, there is a lot of unrest. We do see that there is not peace. People are afraid to go out. They're not just because of COVID, but because of the racial tension. You're like, oh, well, you got to watch out a little more. But true peace, I agree with him, is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. We don't see a lot of justice right now. We think of the recent years that um, blacks have been murdered at the hands of police. And so when we see that, it's hard to think about justice. We think about George Floyd or Breonna Taylor and so many more that it's hard. Or Botham John, who was shot by an officer off duty just because she thought she was in her own apartment. But we see that lives can be taken, and it's when we understand that's why we're not at peace. It is the lack of justice that has happened in relation to all of these situations. Another quote is: "Nothing in this world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity," which is something we can think about sincere ignorance when we think about this election and everything that is surrounded and everything that happened on the day that it should have been certified. Sincere ignorance, when but sincere ignorance guided by someone, when you're not thinking for yourself, when you are allowing yourself to listen to someone who is spewing lies and you believe them, you're walking in ignorance. Not a good thing. I want to focus on a little more on the civil rights. I talked about those who have been killed at the hands of police, or those of us who look like us, who look like me, who have been killed unnecessarily. One early name comes to mind, and that is Emmett Till. The killing of Emmett Till is important because it plays into the beginning of the civil rights movement as we know it. Emmett Till was 14 and he had gone to visit he's in the South, but he wasn't from the South. He was from Chicago, I believe. And one account says he bet his friends, or his friends jeered it on to go say hi to a white woman. Another other account say he just was passing by. But every account says he did nothing. He was accused of whistling at her, he was accused of saying lewd things to her, and he was tortured and killed. When this happened, his mother wanted his body shipped back, and she saw how desecrated his body was. She didn't want to have a closed casket funeral. She wanted it to be open casket so everyone could see what happened to her son. Well, a year later, within later in that year, was when Rosa Parks sat down on that bus and did not get up. Her actions were not haphazard, they were planned. One story I read about her says, "What were you thinking when, at the time of the meeting, when you were planning all this, when you were sitting on the bus?" And she said she was thinking of Emmett Till. She was thinking of what happened to him. Her actions led to the beginning, the strong, forceful beginning of the civil rights movement and many things to come. If you're on, share this and share this particular night with younger people who don't know. These things that I'm talking about tonight, the few things that I'm going to cover, are not in our history books. They should be, but they're not. So tonight is to remind those of us we know, who know, and to enlighten those who don't. Part of our history that's not too far, not too long ago, not too far back. When Rosa Parks sat on that bus in 1955 and refused to get up, it started the bus boycotts of the bus boycotts. And when the bus boycotts started, what did that do? It meant that African Americans in that city were not riding the bus. Why was there not riding the bus important? Well, when they chose not to ride the bus and to walk everywhere, that hit the um that hit the pockets of the city, but it took them a year. Then their case had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to say, okay, you've got to let them ride. Is when you look at it basically. Um, it made a major impact on the economy of the city when people they had to let them ride. So you might ask, well, how were people getting around? They would walk, ride bikes, and formed what we now call carpools. That's what they did back then. You might have to leave home at 5 in the morning because you worked on the other side of town, and whoever was driving you might to be taking people all across town, but they got where they had to go and did not use the bus. Now, what made the city really have to cave in? The same thing that makes us make a change today: economy. When you hit someone in their pocketbook, man, they're going to make a change. The majority of the riders of the buses were African American people. So when none of them were riding, the bus company was not making money. When they were not making money, yeah, they began to see green and not brown skin. It did have to become law, but it became law and they succumbed because it hit their pocketbook. Martin Luther King was chosen to lead this event, to lead this time in Montgomery. And one of the reasons he was chosen was because he was an outsider. He was educated, he was an outsider, he didn't have any ties to anybody in the community, he didn't have anybody holding anything over his head in the community because he wasn't from there. So it made sense to have someone who was well spoken, and he did have he was thought well of. He was young, but he was had a good reputation, and he was the person to make it happen. Just a reminder, and as I say, share this with younger people who don't know all of the history. They may not know because history books won't tell them, and if we don't, they won't know. Rosa Parks was not the first person to be arrested for not giving her proceed. As a matter of fact, Claudette Colvin, um, a little while before Rosa Parks was arrested, and they considered making hers the trial case. But she was pregnant at the time, and they felt like she was not going to be the right person to do it. To get someone to be able to do what Rosa Parks did, it was not easy. She took a risk. She could have been beaten. She could have been killed because she was refusing to move. But she took a stand. She thought about Emmett Till and his life given unnecessarily, and she took that stand. Martin Luther King's role was to make it happen and to keep it visible, keep it in the minds of people to inspire them to keep going. Another quote. The question is not whether we will be extremist, but what kind of extremist we will be. Will it be extreme for love or hate? And I think about that quote, and again, I think about right now, here and now. What kind of extremist are we going to be? We have seen in the very recent past extremists for hate. Martin Luther King believed in love conquering hate, and that's something that's difficult for us to see, difficult for us to understand that that's even a possibility. But that's something that he believed in. Love had the ability to conquer hate. Wow. Do we believe that? Is that something we can see? We see the hate. Are we going to participate and continue in the hate? Or are we going to find a way to let love conquer? I don't have an answer right now for this, but what does love look like in this situation? How do we practice love in a world that is so incredibly filled with hate? What does that look like? Is it something we can do? Is it something we even want to do? That's something we think about. Where does it fit? What do we want it to look like? I don't know. Don't have an answer, but I know in the coming weeks, as we address some issues with Black History Month, we're going to talk about that. Another incident, and tonight is just about a few things that we don't need to forget. And that was a bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, when four little girls on a Sunday morning were just on their way to church. They were at church, ready to go sing in the choir on Sunday morning, dressed in their beautiful little church clothes and their little white socks and shoes, and a bomb hit the side of the church, and they were killed just because they were going to church. Their names were Addie Mae Collins, Carol Denise McNair, Carol Rosamond Robertson, and Cynthia Diane Wesley. And their only crime was going to church. They were ranging in age 14 to 11, and their only crime was going to church. Now, at that time, Birmingham was aptly called Bombingham. Why was it called Bombingham? Because that bombing and so many others. That was actually the third time that that church had been bombed. But people didn't stop going just because it was bombed. No, they weren't going to be scared off by such. And the church is still there. But their only crime was wanting to go to church. Now, when that happened, it added a new light to the emerging civil rights movement. Now we have social media, and if you blink, it can be out there in 2 seconds after you blink. But the equivalent to social media in that day was television. This event was covered on television. Emmett Till's murder was covered in the news. And more things were coming out, being covered, and it um, it was putting light on what's going on. And the more it got out there, the more people realized what was going on. In Birmingham, also known as Bombingham, children were arrested when they marched. And they were put in cages and jailed. Water hoses were turned on people, and the pressure out of a water hose is phenomenal. It will knock a human being over. When this was seen across the country, it brought light to what was going on in the South. Just as now with a cell phone, you can see everything and you can see it in real time. You don't have to wait on the newsman to report it to you. You can see what's going on. But in that time, you saw what the news will report, and as they did begin to report, it became overwhelmingly aware to people that there is something wrong in this country. But I wonder, are we saying the same thing today? There's something wrong in this country when you look at everything that's going on and what's going on and how our people are still being treated, still being killed, still denied justice. Yet the things that they did have an impact on us. Had it not been for the struggles that happened in the civil rights movement, we may not have had a black president, Barack Obama. We may not have Kamala Harris, a black female vice president, because we couldn't vote. And their efforts after being able to ride the bus, being able to have that access, then his his focus became on voting. And why was voting so important? We're going to talk about that after the next quote. Um, I believe that the unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumph. That was a part of his speech when he won the Nobel Prize. Well, I told you that voting was the next initiative where he's like, we have to vote. Why was voting important? Why is voting important? One of the reasons voting, the most important reason, voting impacts everything. Whoever's in office can impact your life, whether you like them or not. Why? Let's just think about um, our current president. Whether you like him or not, oh, yes, his actions have impacted your life. Not just because he's tweeting everywhere, but because he can do executive orders and some that we don't even know about and we won't find out until maybe years later. Why? Because he can appoint judges, judges that are appointed for life. And I don't mean just Supreme Court judges, I mean circuit judges who are there. These are the same judges who can have racist ideals and racist thoughts, and they're going to be there making decisions that impact us as a people, that may impact you personally, but these are the things that can have an impact just because he's the president. So, yes, voting is important. And even though we're not currently in a voting season, if you haven't registered, go do so. Why? We're talking about Martin Luther King and his role in voting. People lost their lives for you to vote. And when you tell some people that, and they'll say, well, okay, that was them. This is actually a comment I've heard. It's like, but why does that impact me? When you don't take the right to vote, you are voting. Because when you don't vote against something you want, you're voting for it. When you don't take the right to vote, you give up your voice to say you want to make a difference where you are. When you don't take the right to vote, you allow things to happen to you, your loved ones, that you don't want to happen. So, yes, voting is important. Voting makes a difference. Voting, wow, is something we have to do. Now, normally I ask you guys to comment, and I believe people are commenting. I am working on a new format, and I still can't see the votes, see the comments yet. I will research and figure this out so next week I can have it worked out. I want to continue to do Thinking Thursday from its own Thinking Thursday page, but with anything new, there are some bugs to be worked out, and that's one of them. Another quote: shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Read that one again. Shallow understanding of people with goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding of people from ill will. If you know just a little bit and want to do a little good, know what you're really doing. Don't be a do gooder for the sake of doing good. Do what's right because it is right, which is what he also said. The time is always right to do what is right. What are you doing that is right? Are you not just voting, but being an educated voter? Are you not just voting, but talking to others about why they should vote? Because so many people feel my vote doesn't matter, my vote doesn't count. Well, there have been elections that have been won by under 100 votes, and you recount it, and it's still the same. Those few people made a difference. So, yes, if you are one who doesn't believe in voting, reach out to me on Facebook. Reach out to me. Reach out to some who are on my page. We'll talk to you about why it really is important. It does matter in your life. A few other areas of the that led to voting that I want to talk about, and one was the Freedom Riders. The Freedom Riders were not writing so much for voting rights, but just for the right to be able to um, ride on a bus was one of the things we couldn't do. Why am I bringing this up? There's so many who have forgotten what so many of the things that African Americans could not do legally that were the law. And as you vote, you'll be voting for people who want to change unjust laws. So interstate commerce, that was something that was not we couldn't just get on the bus. Now we can get on Megabus, Greyhound, or some bus and ride across the country. Post COVID, of course. Um, Post COVID, we could do that. We can't now. We can now legally. And there was a time when, and if you were able to ride the bus, you couldn't. And if you're in the South, you couldn't just get off the bus and go get something to eat if you were in the South. So there were so many restrictions. But voting and voting people into office who were willing to vote in and create new laws is what made that change. So people like the Freedom Riders. And then there's Bloody Sunday. Many of you saw the movie Selma. Some of you may not remember what Bloody Sunday is. Bloody Sunday occurred when King was not at that particular march, but some of those in that worked with him were, and they were going to march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge to march to the Capitol to demand voting rights. Led by John Lewis and others, they were there and met with force, brute force, billy clubs upside your head. You were fought, dogs were sicked on them, all because they wanted to march to the Capitol for things that they deserved, things that you and I may take for granted. See, this happened 50 years ago plus. And when all of these things were going on, they slowly became better. And it was 50 years ago. So if you weren't living and around in that time or don't appreciate history, you forget how meaningful and impactful it is that these things happened. That the civil rights movement is not just a line we read in a history book, and that's about all it gets in a history book. It's more than a line we get. What happened in Birmingham, Alabama, with the Edmund Pettus Bridge impacted our lives. And again, it was televised. And because it was televised and the brutal acts that happened to our brothers and sisters, Others join the fight. Just like today, when we look at many of the marches, there are people who are involved, sincerely involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, who are not black. During the civil rights movement, there were people who were part of the civil rights movement to change laws to impact black lives that were not black. When you think about it, um, the if we are going to be a society, it does make that works. It does make sense that we need to work together. We need everyone. Hate should not proliferate. We should be able to be together. And I can just now figure out how to see some of your comments on my new platform. Um, I want to read yet another quote. And when I was collecting quotes today, I thought I'll just pull some that I like and that are meaningful to me that I want to share. And then I'll highlight the ones I want to read. I'll pick some out. And I was turning them a different color. Um, and they all ended up being another color. And this is one when I think about, when we're discussing Bloody Sunday and its impact on us today, that we overlook that it wasn't just something that happened 50 years ago. It was something that happened over 50 years ago that changed how Black people were perceived nationally. Because, as I said, when others came down because of what they saw that Sunday, it changed their lives. They decided other white people had to come and say, I got to be a part of this. This is wrong. Here's another quote: never succumb to the temptation of bitterness. See, when I talk about what happened in the 50s and the 60s and what's happening in the 2000s, and we see things happening and we think, well, has it changed? Yes, things have changed. Do we have a lot of change to go? Yes. But we should never succumb to the temptation to be bitter, to be evil, to be hateful. Because if we do, we are no better than those who are doing us wrong. We need to not fight, we don't fight evil with evil, but overcome evil with good. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or the darkness of destructive selfishness. We look at our society today. What you see in the news is people that are choosing to walk in the darkness of destructive selfishness. But can you be the one to be creatively altruistic? Can you be the one to say, what I'm doing matters and what I'm doing you need to see? There are a lot of good people doing a lot of good things. We don't see it. Again, the power of the media can be positive and negative. We're highlighting everything that is negative. It's real and we need to know it. But do we know the things that are going on that people are doing in a positive manner? We don't know it because it's not being said. The last thing I want to talk about with regard to Martin Luther King was the Voting Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it prohibited discrimination in public accommodations and federally funded programs. It also strengthened the enforcement of the voting rights and the desegregation of schools. It prohibited discrimination in public. Then that was it. It is HR 7152 and passed in the 88th Congress. And you can actually go back and read it. And then the Voting Rights Act, which is interesting, and the Civil Rights Act, and it wasn't like for perpetuity. It has to be extended. Why? That I don't know enough about legalities for that to ever make sense to me. It has been extended and extended and extended, but why not make it to perpetuity? That I don't know. Another quote. Martin Luther King says, I've decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. So when looking at things that are going on, what do you choose to hold on to? Love? And that's not an easy thing. Holding on to love is never going to be easy. Love is hard. Love takes work. Love is challenging. It was challenging then. It will be challenging now. I don't know that our current lifestyle would allow us to do what those who sat at lunch counters did. It was a different world, a different kind of people. And I think our society, in some ways, may be more hateful, so it may be even more difficult. But can we do something today in our society to make that change, to make things happen? I don't know what that can be, but I know that there are things we can do, which leads me to our call to action. And the first thing is know your history as much as you can. Now, tonight I talked about things that many of you already know, but share it with somebody. So the second one is share your history. I wanted to remind us of just a few in the short time we have. It could only be a few of the things that we know, and to challenge you to go find out some things that you don't know that happened in the 50s and 60s that have had an impact on us today. That if it were not for them, we would not be where we are today. Do not forget the fighters of the movement. Whether you were a proponent of Malcolm X or Martin Luther King's philosophy, don't forget that they both had an impact on us having the freedoms we have today. Being able to go into a store and just buy clothes, being able to try on clothes, those were things that were not afforded to us. To buy a pair of shoes, you would have to go and trace your shoe, give them the picture, give them what you traced, and they bring you the shoe back. You didn't get to try it on to see if it fit. None of those things happened. So we need to know our history as much as we can. Share it with someone young, share it with someone old who doesn't know it. Know what's in your area. In Houston, there is a park, McGregor Park, that has a statue of Martin Luther King Jr. What memorials are there in your city? Are there any memorials to him in your city? If not, why not? If not, help create one. The third call to action bullet is be aware of the world around you, not just what you see in the news. Read, and read some more. As you listen to the news, don't just listen to mainstream media. There's Urban Talk Radio. Listen to Urban Talk Radio. Listen to the BBC. Listen to NPR. Get other viewpoints that are not going to be as mainstream. Broaden your mind so that you will get other viewpoints and maybe have a deeper understanding. And my last point on my call to action is mask up because wearing is caring. Tonight was just an attempt to show you that we need to think about our history. We need to remember that the civil rights movement was real, that people lost their lives for freedom that we can live today, and we don't need to forget. We need to take on the Jewish mantra never forget. When they think of the Holocaust, never forget. We should not forget any of our history. And I'm only speaking of a minuscule part of our history, and that's the civil rights movement. We are so much greater than that. As we move into February, we'll be doing some more things with our history, but I wanted to highlight this. I invite you Sunday to join. We're going to do Monday, I'm sorry, for Martin Luther King Day. We're going to do a Zoom reading, remembering that I have a dream. In the past years, my sister and I have worked with children to do performances at the VA hospital in Houston. It has been well received by veterans. They love it. It's at least 6 or 7 years that we have been doing this. And well, with COVID, we can't do it. So, what we're going to do is a reading. You'll have an opportunity to register for this. I'm going to make a post on my page and on the Thinking Thursday page with the link for the Zoom that will allow you to register so you can come and support our children. These programs have always featured children, giving our children the opportunity to speak. When we were young, we were always having to be on program. But one of the things that did for us when you had to do that church speech or speak at the school because you were on program, you knew how to speak in public. You knew how to present yourself. And those are transferable skills for any job you may have. So join us Sunday. Put on your calendar January 18th at 2 p.m. and look for the post later. It may be in the comment section. If not, I will definitely post it on Thinking Thursday and on my page. And as always, remember, mental health is just health. It's all part of our health. Everything we do impacts us mentally, physically, and spiritually. So be aware of what's going on and practice good mental health. See you next week.